Hey, East Anchorage Book Club podcast listeners. Today is June 24th, 2023, and it's Pride Festival here in Anchorage. Today's guest, like so many LGBTQ folks from our history, spent his life making either-or decisions. Time and time again, for the first 50 years of his life, retired Alaska Superior Court Judge Victor Carlson was unable to live as an openly gay man. But despite that sacrifice, he still faced grave consequences because people assumed he might be gay. Because of people like Vic, LGBTQIA2S plus folk like me live in a different world. Instead of either or, we live in a yes and world. We are able to work in any profession, serve our country in the military, get married, raise children, all while living openly. It is with great gratitude for Victor Carlson's sacrifice that I celebrate Pride today. Because of him, Anchorage, Alaska, and the country are better places. Happy Pride, everyone. Warning, an offensive epithet for gay people will be heard twice in today's episode. Now, here's the show.
I had to not let it affect me. In the courtroom, when somebody would say, I don't have to follow what you said, Judge, because you're a faggot, I'd look at them because who has the gavel? Mm-hmm. Don't argue. I didn't argue with them. I just ignored what. There's nothing, no response you can give to something like that.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to feature Alaskans of importance and interest. Today, we have retired Superior Court Judge Victor Carlson. Born in 1935 and raised on a farm in rural Michigan, Vic realized at an early age three things. Number one, that he wanted to be a lawyer. Two, that he was gay. Three, that he wanted to live in Alaska. He first arrived in Alaska in 1958 before statehood, when he was stationed at Adak with the Navy. He returned in 1962 for good, as a practicing attorney. He did not begin living openly as a gay man until the mid-'80s. At that time, he faced terrible discrimination in Anchorage. In fact, one man went to prison for 6 years for hiring someone to assassinate Judge Carlson. We talk about all that and the current state of LGBTQ rights in Alaska. Well, Victor Carlson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So you grew up in Michigan, correct?
Yes, I'm a farm boy from rural Michigan.
Yeah, per what I read, you went to a one-room schoolhouse.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you were born in 1935.
Correct.
So one-room schoolhouse, 1935, rural Michigan.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
I was very happy being a farm boy. There were all these chores to be done, and, I did.
And did they keep livestock? Did they?
Oh, we milked about 25 cows and raised 40 acres of potatoes and corn and sometimes wheat and, of course, oats and hay. Yes.
Do you miss that lifestyle?
No, I don't miss it because I never expected to do it on my own. Mm-hmm. I respect it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't exist anymore. Small family farms in the United States no longer exist because it costs too much to buy the equipment. Therefore, you have to farm a lot of land and produce a lot to afford the equipment.
Well, you ultimately became an attorney. Did you have a model for that in your family, or
no? My aunt was the first person to go to college in my extended immediate family, and she became a nurse. I had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer from when I was in the 6th or 7th grade. And so the more I learned about it, the more certain I was that that's what I wanted to do.
6th or 7th grade. So what do you think it was about that profession that attracted you at that age?
Well, I rejected the ministry, and I didn't think of medicine as being for me. I didn't know anything about engineers and geographers and other things. So of the three professions, I chose law.
Now, when I was reading about you, you also did serve in the Navy. I guess talk us through finishing up in rural Michigan, college, Navy, law school.
When I've had many fine mentors in my life, and one of them was my junior high school principal, Mrs. Briggs. And when I was in high school, we were all in the same building. I continued to know Mrs. Briggs, and she continued to know me. And I was talking with her when I was a junior or senior in high school. Most of my contemporaries went to Michigan State University, and I was the only one who went to the University of Michigan from my class. She said, you know that there's the Naval ROTC at the University of Michigan. It doesn't exist at State. So, and I wanted to serve in the Navy, so it was pretty obvious what I was going to do.
And did that, I guess, talk us through that by doing it that way and doing the ROTC, then you owed a certain amount of service?
I owed 2 years of active duty, which I did mostly on Adak. But in those days, I was facing the Korean War draft. And so by becoming an ROTC midshipman, I avoided the draft because I was already committed to go on active duty after college.
Now, I read about you before that you had always been fascinated by Alaska and looking towards Alaska.
Yes.
And then you had your naval service on Adak. Was that an accident?
That was completely an accident. I was in the Supply Corps of the Navy, and at Supply Corps School, I scored so that I got assigned to Adak. I was just below the person who was assigned to Saigon, which would have been a wonderful assignment at that time because it was before the war really broke out. And I can't remember what the other two assignments were. I got the second best assignment, and it turned out that it really was a wonderful place to be.
So it's Adak in the early 50s.
Well, in 1957.
1957.
Yes.
So what was Adak like in 1957?
Well, there were 1,800 service personnel and 400 or 500 civilians, some of whom were workers, civilian workers, and the others were dependents of senior enlisted and officers.
I would assume that the majority of those folks weren't looking to make Alaska their home.
No, they were
just stationed there.
Mm-hmm. And if you brought your dependents, you stayed 18 months at that time. And if you were without dependents, you stayed 12 months.
So you were a 12-monther.
But I actually stayed 19 months because I was going to get out.
This was prior to statehood. I guess, was there any, because I guess talk a little bit about wanting to be in Alaska.
Well, I knew that I was gay when I was 5 years old, and when I'm sitting at my one-room country school, I had read enough books and stuff, novels about people who were gay and how they were embarrassing to their families, and I didn't want to embarrass my family. And Alaska was still the United States, and it was far away. Many people have come to Alaska to get away from someplace. I was going to leave Michigan probably in any event because other places were more exciting to me, and as it turns out, Alaska has been much more exciting. My cousins who've stayed in Michigan lead fine lives and have done well, but I've been more places, met more people, and so on.
So you were thinking of Alaska as a way so that you could be gay, really?
I could be away. No.
So you wouldn't embarrass your family?
That's right.
If
it was illegal to be gay in those days. It was against the law here in Alaska, too. So, no, I was not going to be out.
And, I don't want to ask personal questions, but I mean, were you I mean, were you gay in the Navy?
No, of course not.
Right.
No. Nor in college.
So it was something you realized at a very young age, but you kept it completely to yourself.
Yes, of course.
And you finished law school after
the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And where'd you go to law school?
Michigan.
Okay, so back to Michigan for law school, and then you moved to Alaska.
Yes, immediately.
In 1962.
Well, I moved in 1962, February 12th. I arrived in Juneau.
Wow. What was Juneau like in 1962?
Well, the Attorney General's office was a very small office. Ralph Moody was the Attorney General. John Havelock was the deputy. Av Gross was there. Av had graduated from Michigan as well, and he's the reason that I got the job. Really, John Havelock was the reason, but Av came and interviewed at Michigan after he argued the fish trap case. Juneau, of course, was a very small city at that time. Out in the valley, the first major subdivision was just being constructed in 1962.
So the state was 3 years old.
Yes.
And you were in the Capitol. What was your first job in Juneau?
I was with the Attorney General's office. I wasn't admitted to the bar, so I was a legal assistant. And I advised the Department of Health and Social Services, and primarily, and we. The Legislative Affairs Agency was very small, so we wrote bills for the legislators. We got to know every legislator. Within a few weeks, I knew the senators and the representatives, and they didn't have staff, so they came to our office to get help.
That's so interesting. So we would call you Leg Legal. I mean, now we have the lawyers who simply...
You have a huge staff now. Yes.
So you were functionally what we would call Leg Legal today if you were helping with the bills.
Yeah, well, we represented the executive branch as well as helping with bills with the legislative branch.
That is very interesting. And then how long were you in Juneau?
I was in Juneau until April of 1963 when I went to Fairbanks in the district attorney's office.
And how was your experience in Fairbanks?
Well, again, because we were such a small organization, Herb Soule was the district attorney, and there were Tom Fenton and I in the beginning, and then Steve DeLisio joined us. We represented the state offices in Fairbanks, the executive branch, as well as prosecuting.
Right. Well, it's funny because when I was doing the research, it said that you went to Fairbanks to be a prosecutor.
Yes.
But it sounds like there was other stuff that you were doing as well.
That's right, because there was nobody else to do it.
Right. And then I guess you were there until 1969?
No. I was there until 1965.
Okay.
And in July of 65, I moved to work as an assistant city attorney with Carl Walter for the city of Anchorage.
And then in 69,
then in
69,
then in 66, I became the first borough attorney.
Right.
Resident attorney.
I do want to talk about this. So when you became the borough's resident attorney, that is when you helped the borough chairman, John Asplund, do the sewer system for...
Yes. Yeah. Well, John had been the chairman of the Spenard Public Utility District. When the borough was created in 1964, and the public utility districts were absorbed into that, and the only one left soon after that was Spenard, he became the borough, he was elected as borough chairman, which we now call mayor, and John's objective was clean water, clean air, a clean community. And we had 18 sewage outfalls here along the beach. And he knew that we could not get FHA financing for building houses anymore if we didn't have primary sewage treatment.
Right, so we had 18, and it was just like we were just emptying sewage into the
Cook Inlet.
Wow.
Yes. The bases, all the way to the airport and the south. Yes.
I want to go back to something that you said that's interesting to me. So the borough chairman is what we would call today the mayor. But we had a mayor of Anchorage, but it was the mayor of Anchorage City. So the chairman of the borough was actually over the mayor of Anchorage.
Second-class boroughs have very little power over the cities within their area.
Mm-hmm. So in actuality, the mayor of Anchorage was more powerful, but...
Of course, within the city of Anchorage.
Gotcha.
The mandatory powers of the borough, of course, are tax assessing and collecting, planning and zoning, and schools. Mm-hmm. And then you could acquire more powers by vote.
So, to me, it seems like a no-brainer that if we had this dysfunctional sewer system in Anchorage, that we needed a real sewer system. But that's when attorney Edgar Boyko...
Well, Edgar Boyko was representing the major landowners who didn't want to pay taxes,
because it was going to take taxes to do the sewage system.
To pay off the bonds. Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to keep things the way they were simply to avoid additional taxes.
Well, that's right, because of course the whole objective of major landowners in Anchorage and everywhere else is to watch the city leapfrog over them, which then makes their property much more valuable.
So he was representing these landowners who were opposed, and that's when he, I guess, developed a hatred for you. Would you say? Is that?
Yes, I would say that. He picked a lot of fights with Gross, who was the Attorney General, when Jay Hammond was elected, and so on.
So he fought with a lot of folks.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then the Public Defender Agency was born, and you became one or the first public defender?
I became the first public defender. Governor Miller appointed me, and the agency started out in mid-August of 1969.
And what was that like?
Well, it was a great privilege to establish an office in Ketchikan and in Juneau, Nome, here, Fairbanks. These were the only offices we had. We didn't have anybody in Bethel or so on. Of course, Bethel wasn't as big as a place as it is now. And we started out only representing people charged with felonies. Mm. We didn't have the authority to represent people charged with misdemeanors.
Can you talk about what people did prior to that agency?
The court appointed lawyers to represent them. And most of these lawyers did a very, very good job. But, if you're representing insurance companies and suddenly you have to represent somebody in criminal court, you either go back in your experience when you were doing that and starting out, or you talk to somebody who is a very good criminal defense lawyer and figure out what to do.
So I'm curious, so they would, was it that they had a list of all of the lawyers and it was like everyone had to do this?
Yes.
This went through the list and every lawyer had to represent somebody when their name came up.
If they were appointed. Yes.
Interesting. And so the benefit of the public defenders is that you had somebody whose specialty was defending people in criminal court.
Yes.
I didn't know that. And then you were working as a public defender when you became a judge?
Yes, because with the money from the sale of the oil leases, there were 5 Superior Court judgeships created, one for Sitka, one for Kenai, one for Kodiak, an additional one for Fairbanks, and an additional one for Anchorage. And I was appointed to the Sitka Superior Court position down in the 1st Judicial District.
And did you move to Sitka?
Yes, but really I moved to Juneau because that's where the work was. There was no work for a Superior Court judge. Roger Dubrock was a district court judge. Most everything was within his jurisdiction. I would go to Sitka every 2 weeks or so for the occasional divorce or something. The police chief in Sitka at that time never charged anybody with a felony. He always charged them with misdemeanors because it was easier. And I don't berate him for that. This was just his philosophy, and it was a practical thing.
So how long did you serve as the Sitka Superior Court judge?
5 years.
And then you came back to Anchorage?
Transferred here. I was appointed by Governor Hammond to the position here.
Got it. Now, when you were appointed in 70, Boyko was really opposed to that. And there was he was doing newspaper columns against you even at that time.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit? I mean, because was it just a grudge that he had from the sewage system arguments, or was there something else there?
Well, I don't know that Ed Boyko cared whether one was gay or not. Mm-hmm. I doubt if he did. He was a much larger man than that. Mm-hmm.
But he implied that you were gay in his articles that he wrote about you.
Yes.
Well, why do you think he thought you were gay?
I wasn't married.
And you were 35 years old then, I guess?
Yes, I was 35.
So you were 35 and unmarried, so that was enough for him to suspect that you might be.
Yes, and also, when I would go to concerts, I would take older women sometimes. I'd take men sometimes. My friends, whoever my friends were.
Well, when we talked earlier, we mentioned earlier that it was against the law to be gay, and you moved to Alaska to not embarrass your family. I mean, at what point were you ever seeing men? Were you ever,
Not until I really came out with AIDS and the Alaskan AIDS Assistance Association. And I was asked to be on the board of the 4As. And I just saw the need to do that. And I knew that was going to be a change, but I was already fairly secure, even though you have to run every 6 years as a Superior Court judge. Mm-hmm. I thought that.
Well, that was the mid 80s.
Yes.
So from 1970 to the mid 80s. So from really age 35 to almost age 50. I mean, you were still completely closeted. You didn't have affairs.
No.
Were. So it's a different lens that we're looking at through today. To me, I'm like, how could he call you gay? How could he imply that? I mean, because you weren't acting on any of that.
Well, but one can be gay without being
true.
Sexually active.
Right. But I feel like you were making huge sacrifices, and yet he was still able to, through innuendo.
Yes.
And you did get engaged at one point, right?
I did get engaged, And I recognized that that was not the thing to do, that I was not going to be a good husband to a woman.
Did you, how did you, I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? Like, how did you end that? Or
By saying, we're through. And that was a very tough decision. And I, every decision like that I've made, whether it's, misleading somebody else, misleading myself, I never should have gotten in that position. It took me 2 years to recover from that. And every time I've done something like that, it's taken me 2 years. I mean, I've done similar things by misleading somebody, by not following through on my commitment. I feel very strongly about the fact that one should follow through on their commitments. But I also feel very strongly, if you recognize in time that you shouldn't.
Right. So you had just been, I guess, reconfirmed, that's the right word, 1984.
Yeah.
And that, so you just got, gone through the election of 1984, which was prior to you coming out when joining the 4As. So, and that did give you sort of a 6-year window where you didn't have to worry about.
Well, and I was going to have had 20 years on the bench by that time.
Right.
And that's.
So you came, I mean, when we say you came out, I mean, how, was it by just supporting the 4As?
Well, by being on the board of 4As, becoming the president of the board, raising money, speaking out.
Did people ask you if you were gay?
No. No.
Okay.
I mean, if you're good friends with somebody,
right,
you usually would know, although I'm surprised that some of my good friends didn't, and I had to tell them.
And when I asked earlier about, acting on being gay, you said it wasn't until you joined the 4As. And then did you start dating that time, or?
I started in 85, I think, was the first time that I started dating and thinking about having a long-term relationship.
So you were 50?
Yes.
Yeah. Was that an exciting time for you? Was it?
It was a fulfilling time. Exciting? I think all of my life has been exciting, so I don't think it's been more exciting.
I guess maybe a better question was it a relief to be able to just?
Oh, yes, it is a relief. And when I see people fighting it so much, I talk with them about, how freeing it is. The person that you need to be out to is yourself. That's number one. Whether you're out to anybody else is up to you.
What's interesting about your story is that it sounds like you knew when you were 5, and then you didn't fight it. You acknowledged it. You just didn't act on it for 45 years.
That's right. Yeah.
Although there was the potential for you to marry a woman, and that there was that chapter in there.
Yes.
There was consequences to you being more open. So I want to talk about that now.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, so there was already, Boyko had already sort of been on the record as implying that you were gay and sort of...
and the man with the bus here who...
Oh, yeah.
Talked
That's
about
Bill Nelson.
Yeah,
Wild Bill.
Wild Bill from the Valley. And I had ruled in a case where he had sold his gravel rights for a pittance to one of the regional corporations, and a contract is a contract.
So he signed the contract and you upheld the contract.
Yes, and he hated me.
And he had an RV with a trailer and he put signs on it.
Right, that faggot judge.
Yes.
And he drove around the courthouse and drove around
Where you were
town.
working.
Oh, yes, of course.
So everyone knew that truck.
Yes.
How did that affect you?
I had to not let it affect me. In the courtroom, when somebody would say, I don't have to follow what you said, Judge, because you're a faggot, I'd look at them because who has the gavel? Don't argue. I didn't argue with them. I just ignored what. There's no response you can give to something like that.
Right. Well, and I think just for our listeners, that's really the bulk of your cases was divorce, family type.
I had the Meach case. He's the man who shot the 4 kids. I had lots of cases.
Okay. I guess it was just in my research, the people who were the angriest were the people who were involved in divorce cases, it seems. Like Laverne Brooks, for example.
Well, he's the one who hired the man to kill me, yes.
Yeah, so talk about that. I mean, that's what's,
Well, he had married his wife so that he'd have a slave to work for him. And maybe I was overzealous in deciding that she should get more of his property than the Supreme Court allowed her to get, but she got some of it. And that upset him a great deal. So he had a tenant who I had sentenced and had served time on the sentence, and he offered to pay this tenant so much, first I'll pay you this much when you bring me his wallet, and on and on. And of course, the tenant, being a smart person, went immediately to the police.
Wow, so he picked the wrong person to hire.
That's right, because as proven time after time, people accused of crimes do not hate their lawyers, nor do not hate the judges, or don't hate the prosecuting attorney.
So Laverne Brooks assumed that because you had been the judge
Yes.
in the sentence against him, that he would be on board with murdering you.
Right.
How did you find out about...
The police told me.
Okay.
And said, give us your wallet and with your driver's license and so on. And I'm completely cooperative in that. I respect the police and respected the investigator who was working on the case, and then started sleeping in a basement. I wasn't, because I didn't know anything about it. I mean, they just told me there's somebody who is hired to kill you, and so,
And they didn't tell you who?
No. Oh, no.
And I guess, and Laverne Brooks was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
Yes.
Did you ever have any interaction with him again?
No.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
But that wasn't like the end of your trouble.
No.
You had more trouble, and this is getting back to Boyko, all the way back from fighting you with the sewage system.
In the 90 retention election, I thought that it would be brought up. I thought it was going to be brought up in the 84 retention election. And
the gay stuff.
And so I hired somebody to run my campaign, because once you're attacked, you can have a campaign. And lawyers contributed to that. Luckily, we were able to give much of their money to the Boys and Girls Club.
When you decided not to?
No. This was 84.
Okay, 84. Right, but you didn't
have
it didn't count. Gotcha.
Didn't have a campaign in 90 because I decided that I could not win it. I thought that the tenor of the community was such. I'm not sure if that's really true, but, 1/3 of the people generally vote no.
Right.
So you only have a small group of people that have to be convinced.
17%.
Yes.
Or so. Yeah.
And, we've come close to losing some very, very good judges.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happened, Boyko was defending a police officer, Frank Feidinger, and who'd been charged for tricking teenage boys into making nude tapes.
I don't know much about the Feidinger case other than when he was interviewing this young man who was of age. He asked the young man to change his underwear and the young man was just giving an interview like we're doing here, but the jury didn't find that offensive.
Right. Well, my understanding was that Boyko, as his defense attorney, made the argument that the police officer was working in some sort of top secret sting to expose this child sex ring of Anchorage VIPs, and the implication was that the VIP was trying to expose was you. And he later admitted that was all false, but that was going to be his defense argument. This police officer was doing top secret important work.
Isn't that exactly what went against Hillary Clinton and the pizza parlor place?
Right, 100%.
Yes. Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah, it is. It is. That you can definitely see a parallel there for sure. This was a media sensation at the time. I mean, in the same way that Hillary Clinton's case was, too. That everyone in Anchorage knew about this case and was following.
It was in the front page of the newspapers, yes.
Right. So you decided that it was too risky.
I didn't want to put my friends through that.
Mm-hmm. Because you had met your partner by then.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had met Sherry by 1989. In 1989. Mm-hmm.
And did that play, was that a factor in deciding not?
No, that wasn't a factor. No, I just didn't think that we could win.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, the worst thing that could have happened is that you could have lost. So you could have gone for it.
That's right. I could have. Maybe I should have. But I didn't want to put my friends through it. I didn't want them to donate their money, which they would have.
So they would have lost their money. And I'll just speak for myself as someone who's run for office and asked for money. It's hard to ask people for money when you're in a situation where it looks like you might lose, because
why should they make that investment?
It's hard for you to believe in yourself, and there could be some real. You have to. It's a terrible thing asking for money from your friends and have them say no. And how does that feel?
Well, I wouldn't have done the asking. Mm-hmm. I would have hired a campaign manager. Mm-hmm. I would have stayed apart from that. I would have put $50,000 into it as a start. That's nothing today. Right. But at that time, it was a significant amount. It could buy quite a bit of advertising. And there were people who would have supported me and put in lots of money.
Right.
But no, I didn't want to put us through that.
Right. So you didn't do it. What did you do after you decided not to? If you stepped down.
I wanted to teach. I had enjoyed teaching business law as an adjunct and other things, and I wanted to teach. So I did get a couple adjunct positions, and I found out I was spending more time. Well, wasn't making $10 an hour on it, but I wasn't teaching to make the money. I was teaching to have the interaction, and it wasn't like it was when I was teaching in Fairbanks at the university there, night business law courses, or when I first was teaching here at the community college business law courses when I had the opportunity for a couple years. And so I wasn't getting the feedback and satisfaction out of it. So I quit.
Can you talk a little bit, sort of changing topics for a moment, about what it was like just to be gay? I mean, I know your specific situation was completely different than the average person's because it was so public, and most people didn't have somebody driving a truck around, defaming them. But what was the gay community like in Anchorage in the early 90s, late 80s?
It was a very good place. We had Garden Buddies, which was a group of people, men who met once a month in somebody's home, sort of a potluck situation. Identity was, of course, the gay community's coordinating body, and I became part of that. Identity had a potluck once a month at the Unitarian Universalist Church, where both supporters and gay men and women met. It was a vital time.
And you could have, the Constitution says that judges have to retire at age 70. So you stepped down at age 55. So yes. You cut your career 15 years short as a judge. I guess, do you feel it's such a, I hate to ask the question. It feels like a rude question to ask. Do you feel like you wasted the 15 years?
Well, John Salemi, who was a public defender, in 1995 said, "Vic, we have a position for you out in Bethel." John and I were good friends, and he knew that for my mental health I needed to do something. And so he said, "You need to go to Bethel." And I had worked in Bethel, both as a prosecutor from Fairbanks and as a judge, and so on. And so I went to Bethel to be the defense attorney, the public defender. And we started out with two other assistants, one doing class. I did the major felonies and somebody else did the lesser felonies and another person did the misdemeanors. Of course, those people were just overwhelmed with work. I was overwhelmed with work. The people who had preceded us had worked very hard, but they were overwhelmed. And I tried to bring some order to the chaos so that we could get something done. Mm-hmm. And we did get something done, but still it was too many cases, too many people to interview, too much time spent over in the jail interviewing our clients, and so on. But I had
It was too hard.
a very good year in Bethel, and then I went to Kotzebue for 2 years.
And you physically lived in Bethel for that
Yes,
year, and then you
yes.
physically moved to Kotzebue for 2 years.
That's right. I was able, because there's good jet service, I could return here to Anchorage often, and my husband was very understanding, and so, our lives continued.
And then after the Kotzebue job, didn't you retire?
Then I retired completely in 1999, yes.
And how have the last 24 years been?
Zip. Just zip. In the summertime, we have a bed and breakfast, so that's been interesting and meeting interesting people. I no longer can do the work like I did, so I don't get that satisfaction, but Jerry does that.
Like the work of cleaning and
Cleaning and serving breakfast. I can make the breakfast at my house, and then we take them over to the B&B.
Gotcha.
And stuff.
So that's one of the things in the article that Charles Wolforth had written in 2016 was that you and Jerry had separate homes. Did y'all really live?
Well, we have houses.
You have
separate houses.
Gotcha.
I think we have one home.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I wondered about that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess looking at LGBTQ rights in America and in Alaska, how do you feel things are today?
Right this minute, they're still quite good. But Justice Thomas told us what's going to happen. And we need to be aware of that.
Right, to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges.
Well, yes.
As a start.
All of gay marriage is based upon a court decision, just like the right to an abortion was based upon a court decision. That decision can be reversed.
It sounds like that's something you really do believe could happen.
Oh, I know it could happen. I'm not sure that it will happen, but the way things are going, it's very likely. Now, it won't affect me because I don't think that they're going to erase the marriages which already exist, because that would be so much chaos with the IRS and so on and stuff. But they can say there's no more marriage, and then it would be a state-by-state decision, and so on. And since we were the first state to say that marriage is between one man and one woman,
right.
We were the first to amend our Constitution. We're leaders in that field.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an issue.
Well, and that's part of the 5-year thing. We had several initiatives, or trying to reverse something that the Assembly had done or hadn't done. And, I contributed money, I contributed time to those efforts. So that's something that I was doing during that 5 years.
The last question we ask of all our guests is if they have a book they'd like to recommend to our listeners. Do you have a book that you'd recommend?
Not on any subject that's relevant to our conversation.
You could do a non-relevant recommendation.
Watch the Bear by Derek Stoneroff is a new book that Derek just wrote, and it is very insightful of his many years of being a naturalist. He lives in Homer. It was reviewed in the ADN. It was a very fine review. It's an outstanding book.
Well, Victor Carlson, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And thank you so much for all your work in Alaska, all your work for the LGBTQ community. I mean, for everything.
Well, it's just been a privilege to be an Alaskan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Maya Narang for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact my legislative office, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or email East Anchorage Book Club at gmail.com. East Anchorage Book Club, all one word.